for where we're going to go. We're using Kent Keefe's book, Do It Anyway. He has a series of different books, one that focuses on the Christian journey. That's the one that we're pulling information from. But also there's another piece called Have Faith Anyway that we may jump into in the month of September. Right now we're going to pick up on week 3. I'm going to ask that for those of you who've been following along, and whatever medium you're watching on now, and for those of you who are listening, if you want to go back, those of you on Uber Conference, you're going to have to go to YouTube to our church's page, SMZBC Worships, or to our Facebook pages, our church's Facebook page or my personal Facebook page. And I think you also can go to our Twitter page, and I think it's there as well. Week 1 was a foundational piece. Week 2, we focused on the first paradoxical commandment: people are illogical and reasonable, self-centered. Love them anyway. And today we're going to focus on week 3. I hope that you can stay with us for the duration of this Bible study, as I believe that God is blessing us in a major way with this piece. Now, there's no way we start talking about paradoxical commandments, right, without first thinking about the word paradox. And what is a paradox? Last week I shared with you the dictionary.com definition as well. Today I'm just going to deal with the Merriam-Webster dictionary definition, which you find on the screen. Paradox, as a statement, is something that is seemingly contradictory or opposed to common sense and yet is perhaps true. All right. And so I'm going to deal with that in a minute, but I want to start off with what Kent Keefe focuses on in all of the books. Kent Keefe wants us to understand that God is calling us to live a paradoxical life. All right. A life that is contradictory to what we see in the world that we're living in. Now, Keefe definitely talks about in all of the books how many of us want to live lives that are success driven. We want to live lives that lead us to happy spaces, lives that lead us to having some meaning in life. But what Keefe really talks about in this piece that we're focusing on here, Keefe really wants us to understand that a happy, joyful, purposeful, peaceful life is lived when we are understanding what it is that God has for us in our lives. And so that's what we've been dealing with. Now, each one of these commandments are 2-part. And you'll see here on the screen, each commandment begins with a statement of adversity. People are illogical. People are unreasonable. People are self-centered. All right. But then the second part of the statement of adversity is followed by a positive commandment. Love them anyway. All right. Now, you're going to hear me talk about throughout this paradoxical commandment is almost like a thesis statement. I pray that you get it. The first part of the paradoxical commandments always focus on other people. The second part focuses on you. You cannot control other people. I hope you get that. I don't care how smart you are, for some of us, how manipulative you can be. You cannot control anybody else. Stop wasting your time. The only behavior that you can control is your own. All right. So yes, people are unreasonable. They are illogical. They are self-centered, but love them anyway. All right. And each week you're going to catch this commandment that is 2-part. All right. Here's the second paradoxical commandment. This is what we're going to focus on today. If you do good, people will accuse you of selfish, ulterior motives. Do good anyway. Ken Keefe says this in the book. Almost every day you can hear people casting suspicion on the motives of someone who is what? Doing good. They imply that others who seem to be doing good are only pretending to do good when in fact they have their own selfish motives. But Ken Keefe wants us to understand that even if that is the way that people feel about you, do good anyway. If you do good, people will accuse you of selfish, ulterior motives. You can't control other people. So, irregardless of what they think about you, do good anyway. Them, they're going to accuse you. Them, they're illogical. They're unreasonable. That's them. You, love anyway. You, do good anyway. All right? Make sure that you catch that. Ken Keith at some point served as the president of Chaminade University of Honolulu. Those of you who are sports fans, you know every year Chaminade has this, where there's an incredible basketball tournament out in Honolulu. Chaminade is usually one of the universities that plays there. They knocked off number one UVA back in 1984, one of the greatest upsets in Division I basketball history for sports fans. For the rest of you, you may have never heard of Chaminade University. Well, Ken Keith served as president there for a while. So you religious university. I want to share a couple notes, but then get to the point. All right. The university had an important mission and vision. Quality of teaching there was excellent. Like all small private universities, they hit a point where they were in dire financial straits. They were facing losing their accreditation. Somebody offered up the opportunity for Kent Keith to come. He felt the call. He felt like it was worth saving. And so he ended up taking the job. He goes on to tell us in the book that after he had taken the job, they'd gone through this tough, agonizing season, that there were one of the professors there who came to him and told him that they understood that one of the reasons he took this job was to build his resume so that he can go on and run for public office or do something else. They were questioning his motives. You took it because it would be a good springboard, they said. You plan to run for a statewide office. This is just part of your plan to increase your visibility. Position yourself to run, they say. Keith says, I was truly surprised. Taking the job had been a big risk for me professionally and personally, but I accepted the risk only because I fervently believed in the university and I wanted it to survive. Here's Kent Keith's message. People will question your motives. They will think that you're doing one thing for one reason and you cannot control that. But what Keith wants you to understand is that regardless of what people think about what you do good anyway. All right. So here's a question for you. And if you are, if you want to reply on Facebook or on YouTube, you can. All right. Do you know anyone who interprets the actions of others in terms of selfish, ulterior motives? Do you know anyone like that who interprets the actions of other folks in terms of selfish, ulterior motives? Where every time somebody does something good, that person has something to say about it and is questioning the motives. Now, real quickly, we're going to jump into a couple stories, and we're not going to hold you long today. But David knew what it was like to be accused of selfish, ulterior motives. All right. You know David's story, and we've seen it on several different levels. We're going to take a second today to look at 1 Samuel, the 17th chapter. And actually, I'm going to just let it play for you. And so I want you to listen. I'm going to try my best not to interrupt the storytelling. And then I'll jump in with a few key pieces once we make some headway into the story.
Now the Philistines gathered their forces for war and assembled at Socoh in Judah. They pitched camp at Ephes-Dammim between Socoh and Azekah. Saul and the Israelites assembled and camped in the valley of Elah and drew up their battle line to meet the Philistines. The Philistines occupied one hill and the Israelites another, with the valley between them. A champion named Goliath, who was from Gath, came out of the Philistine camp. His height was 6 cubits and a span. He had a bronze helmet on his head and wore a coat of scale armor of bronze, weighing 5,000 shekels. On his legs he wore bronze greaves, and a bronze javelin was slung on his back. His spear shaft was like a weaver's rod, and its iron point weighed 600 shekels. His shield bearer went ahead of him. Goliath stood and shouted to the ranks of Israel,
"Why do you come out and line up for battle? Am I not a Philistine? And are you not the servants of Saul? Choose a man and have him come down to me. If he's able to fight and kill me, we will become your subjects. But if I overcome him and kill him, you will become our subjects and serve us.
Then the Philistines said,
This day, I defy the armies of Israel. Give me a man and let us fight each other.
On hearing the Philistines' words, Saul and all the Israelites were dismayed and terrified. Now David was the son of an Ephrathite named Jesse, who was from Bethlehem in Judah. Jesse had 8 sons, and in Saul's time he was very old. Jesse's 3 oldest sons had followed Saul to the war. The firstborn was Eliab, the second Abinadab, and the third Shammah. David was the youngest. The 3 oldest followed Saul, but David went back and forth from Saul to tend his father's sheep at Bethlehem. For 40 days the Philistine came forward every morning and evening and took his stand. Now Jesse said to his son David,
Take this ephah of roasted grain and these 10 loaves of bread for your brothers, and hurry to their camp. Take along these 10 cheeses to the commander of their unit. See how your brothers are, and bring back some assurance from them. They are with Saul and all the men of Israel in the valley of Elah, fighting against the Philistines.
Now, I know most of you are, you were listening to Goliath, and you probably said that was Goliath sound like Debo off of Friday. You might be right. I think it was the same character. We are, when you look at this story, all right, so we want to make sure that you get the background information. Again, with the premise and the focus, trying to put it in perspective that people are going to question your motives, right? So you see the Philistines and the Israelites drawing up for confrontation, and Goliath was taunting the Israelites. That's what we just heard. All right, we just heard the lead up to the battle. Now, last couple of verses you hear, all right, you hear about Eliab and Shammah and all of the other brothers who are older, more experienced, and if there are any of the sons of Jesse that are prepared for war, it's probably not David. All right. Yet David's dad sends him to the Israelite camp with food for his brothers and for their commander. Period. That was his job. All right. David is doing what he was told to do by his dad. All right. So I want you to keep on listening to the rest of.
Early in the morning, David left the flock in the care of a shepherd, loaded up, and set out as Jesse had directed. He reached the camp as the army was going out to its battle positions, shouting the war cry. Israel and the Philistines were drawing up their lines facing each other. David left his things with the keeper of supplies, ran to the battle lines, and asked his brothers how they were. As he was talking with them, Goliath, the Philistine champion from Gath, stepped out from his lines and shouted his usual defiance. And David heard it. Whenever the Israelites saw the man, they all fled from him in great fear. Now the Israelites had been saying,
Do you see how this man keeps coming out? He comes out to defy Israel. The king will give great wealth to the man who kills him. He will also give him his daughter in marriage and will exempt his family line from taxes in Israel.
David asked those standing near him,
What will be done for the man who kills this Philistine and removes this disgrace from Israel? Who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God?
They repeated to him what they had been saying and told him,
This is what will be done for the man who kills him.
Now, David shows up, starts asking the questions about Goliath, all right? And clearly Goliath is already saying what's going to happen, all right? But David just wants reassurance. So he's asking his brothers, so who is this dude? What's going to happen to him if somebody takes him out? And Eliab gets upset, all right? So he is now doing what we've been saying. Even if you have motives that are right, people will question your motives, all right? And you got to make a decision. The same thing I told you last week. I'll pause right here for a second. People are illogical, they're unreasonable, they're self-centered. Now, the challenge is, are you going to get stuck in that, or are you going to love them anyway? Are you going to get stuck in what people are saying about your motives, or are you going to keep on doing good anyway? All right, because people are going to question why you do what you do. That's just a part of life. But if you feeling God calling you to do something, then you got to do good anyway. All right. So again, there's two parts to it. If people are questioning you, or you can keep on doing good. And for those of you who are doing the questioning, are you going to get to the point where you understand that you cannot control other people, but there's a response that God has for you. All right. Let's keep on listening to the story.
When Eliab, David's oldest brother, heard him speaking with the men, he burned with anger at him and asked,
"Why have you come down here? And with whom did you leave those few sheep in the wilderness? I know how conceited you are and how wicked your heart is. You came down only to watch the battle."
Now what have I done?
said David.
Can't I even speak?
He then turned away to someone else and brought up the same matter, and the men answered him as before. What David said was overheard and reported to Saul, and Saul sent for him.
Now, David is accused. You hear him. All right. Let's go back and look at, all right, his brother, his oldest brother. Why have you come down here? And with whom did you leave those sheep? He even threw a shot in. Who did you leave those few sheep in the wilderness? I know, and this is what people do. So if you go and look at what Eliab is doing, Eliab is taking a whole lot of shots fired here. Why did you come back here? Huh? Why are you here? Whom did you leave those few sheep in the wilderness? At few sheep in the wilderness. Why are you here? Questions. I know how conceited you are. I know how wicked your heart is. You came down here only to watch the battle. Now here's the thing. And you see David's response. Can I even speak now what I've done? He actually turns, talks to somebody else, asking the same questions. All right. Now, here's the thing. You've got to get to the point where people's questioning of you, they're instigating your thoughts. Why you doing what you're doing? You got to be up to something. You want something. You're trying to get something out of it. You got to get to the point where you determine whether or not God is leading you or not. And if it is, then people's questioning it can't stop what you're doing. All right? And so this is what David is doing. He doesn't let Eliab's focus and attention on his intention stop him from doing what God has for him to do. David was accused of selfish, ulterior motives, but it did not deter him. He kept asking questions until he understood what was going on. Then he went on to do good anyway. Let's see how the story ends.
David said to Saul,
"Let no one lose heart on account of this Philistine. Your servant will go and fight him."
Saul replied,
"You are not able to go out against this Philistine and fight him. You are little more than a boy, and he has been a warrior from his youth."
But David said to Saul,
"Your servant has been keeping his father's sheep. When a lion or a bear came and carried off a sheep from the flock, I went after it, struck it, and rescued the sheep from its mouth. When it turned on me, I seized it by its hair, struck it, and killed it. Your servant has killed both the lion and the bear. This uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them, because he has defied the armies of the living God. The Lord who rescued me from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear will rescue me from the hand of this Philistine."
Saul said to David,
"Go, and the Lord be with you."
Then Saul dressed David in his own tunic. He put a coat of armor on him and a bronze helmet on his head. David fastened on his sword over the tunic and tried walking around, because he was not used to them.
"I cannot go in these,"
he said to Saul,
"because I am not used to them."
So he took them off. Then he took his staff in his hand, chose 5 smooth stones from the stream, put them in the pouch of his shepherd's bag, and with his sling in his hand, approached the Philistine. Meanwhile, the Philistine, with his shield bearer in front of him, kept coming closer to David. He looked David over and saw that he was little more than a boy, glowing with health and handsome, and he despised him. He said to David,
"Am I a dog that you come at me with sticks?"
And the Philistine cursed David by his gods.
"Come here,
He said,
and I'll give your flesh to the birds and the wild animals. Ah!
David said to the Philistine,
You come against me with sword and spear and javelin, but I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. This day the Lord will deliver you into my hands, and I'll strike you down and cut off your head. This very day I will give the carcasses of the Philistine army to the birds and the wild animals, and the whole world will know that there is a God in Israel. All those gathered here will know that it is not by sword or spear that the Lord saves, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give all of you into our hands.
As the Philistine moved closer to attack him, David ran quickly toward the battle line to meet him. Reaching into his bag and taking out a stone, he slung it and struck the Philistine on the forehead. The stone sank into his forehead, and he fell face down on the ground. So David triumphed over the Philistine with a sling and a stone. Without a sword in his hand, he struck down the Philistine and killed him. David ran and stood over him. He took hold of the Philistine's sword and drew it from the sheath. After he killed him, he cut off his head with the sword. When the Philistines saw that their hero was dead, they turned and ran. Then the men of Israel and Judah surged forward with a shout and pursued the Philistines to the entrance of Gath and to the gates of Ekron. Their dead were strewn along the Sheruim road to Gath and Ekron. When the Israelites returned from chasing the Philistines, they plundered their camp.
Now, I don't have to, clearly this is probably one of the Bible's greatest stories. Definitely one of the greatest stories in the Old Testament, and many of us know it. I don't have time to dig into all of the meat that is here. I mean, people do sermon series on this text alone and deal with them incrementally. I just want to make sure that you get the context of David is assigned to go to where the war is. Dad says to check in. David goes there. He sees that there is a huge giant who is a Philistine giant, who is putting fear into the Israelites. No one is stepping out and making any difference. And so David sees it as an opportunity for him to fight not just for his people, but for his God. And so David, after Saul attempts to try to give him his own fighting utensils, David uses what he has. None of this would have taken place if Eliab's words had sunken into the spirit of David. All right. And this is our point. After the conversation with his brother, David could have gotten angry and did what? Went back home. Instead, he volunteered to fight Goliath and he won. All right. David did good anyway. How many times has the words of somebody else stopped you from doing what God has you to do? How many times has the actions of somebody else stopped you from doing what God wants you to do? How many times have you been on a mission? You've been focused, and somebody's either immaturity or not being connected to the vision that God has for you, or who doesn't understand the movement in your life at the time? How many times are people's own feelings and situations and their own things that they're dealing with stopped you because of their words? Again, Eliab wasn't getting the job done, but he was going to try to block David from getting the job done too. Why? Because he did not feel like David was ordained for that moment. And sometimes you got to show people that the good that you do is for the good of the kingdom. And you cannot let other people stop you from doing good anyway. All right. Another quick thing, and we're going to wrap this thing up, but can't keep in this story. I want to just share this real quickly. Later in the story, this is later, as David is now a grown king. When David was king, his son Absalom raised an army to seize the throne from him. David fled Jerusalem with his officials and supporters. During his flight, he was accosted by one of the members of Saul's clan, Shemiah. Shimei cursed David, pelting him and his officials with stones. Get out, you man of blood, you scoundrel, he says. The Lord has repaid you for all the blood you shed in the house of Israel, in the house of Saul, in whose place you have reigned. David, you know the story. David had been loyal to Saul, been loyal to his son Jonathan, had assumed the throne only after they both had been killed in battle. Now, after serving many years as a good king, he was being accused of being a scoundrel with selfish, ulterior motives who had shed blood in Saul's household. But David was not disheartened. He continued to do good anyway. He could have had Shimei killed, but he let him live, saying, "It may be that the Lord will see my distress and repay me with good for the cursing I am receiving today." So we spent time looking at the life of David. It's always good to end the Bible study or end this conversation talking about Jesus. Jesus did a whole lot of good things. He was also accused of what? Selfish, ulterior motives. During his ministry, he healed the sick, right? He fed the hungry. He reached out to comfort the outcast. He consistently helped other people. Yet, while doing good, the Jewish leaders took him to Pilate, took him to Herod. He was accused of subverting the nation. He was accused of opposing the payments of taxes to Caesar and claiming to be the king. The Apostle Peter understood that when we do good, we may suffer. And this is what we find here in 1 Peter, the 2nd chapter, verses 20 through 23. This is the NIV The Voice translation. "For what credit is there in enduring punishment you deserve? But if you suffer for doing good and you endure it, this is commendable before God. To this you were called, because Christ suffered for you, leaving you an example that you should follow in his footsteps. When he was verbally abused, he didn't return the abuse. When he suffered, he didn't make threats to cause suffering in return. Instead, he trusted that all who would be put right by the one who is just when he judges. The choice is ours, and we should always choose to do good. The choice is ours, and we should always choose to love anyway. Yes, they're illogical. Yes, they're unreasonable. Yes, they're self-centered. Yes, they will question your motives, but do good anyway. Galatians 6 has some great words that I want to share with you before we bring this to a conclusion. The 9th verse, the Voice translation, you know it. May we never tire of doing what is good and right before our Lord, because in this season we shall bring in a great harvest if we can just persist. So seize any opportunity that the Lord gives you to do good things and be a blessing to everyone, especially those within our faithful family. People may accuse you of selfish, ulterior motives, my brothers and my sisters. If they do, don't allow yourself to be distracted. You are the second part of the commandment, not the first part. You're not the illogical. You're not the unreasonable. You're not the self-centered. You're not the one who is questioning motives. You're the one that loves anyway. You're the one that does good anyway. Psalm 37, chapter, the 3rd verse. Trust in the Lord and do good. If you do good, people will accuse you of selfish motives, ulterior motives, but do good anyway. And so here's my challenge. Be the person God wants you to be. A person who does good. You can only control you. So what is it that you're doing as it relates to the life that you are living? Be a person who loves. Be a person that does good. Ken Keith challenges us at the beginning of the book to find your personal meaning in a life that is connected to God. That's what I'm trying to challenge you to do. Don't get caught up in living lives that are success-driven, car counting, house living, putting it basically on where you go, how much clothes you got, how much money. No. God is saying, I'm looking for people that are living out my life, living out my will on a daily basis. Be the type of person that focuses on your own actions and does what God has for you. If you do good, people will accuse you of selfish, ulterior motives. But we're going to do what? Do good anyway. That's my Bible study for today. I want to thank all of you who have joined us for Bible study today. If you're a part of our church family or connected as a friend of the Mount, we're going to ask you to continue to keep our sick and shut in prayer. We're going to ask you to continue to keep us in prayer as a church to make sure that we are doing the things that God has called us to do. Join us tomorrow for our prayer call at 7 a.m. You can jump on 203-9011. You also are invited to join us for our first drive-in worship on this Sunday at 10 a.m. We're going to be honoring our graduates, honoring our scholarship recipients. I'm going to preach a word, and we're just going to fellowship by being in each other's presence. We're staying in our cars. We're keeping our mask on. We're socially distanced, but we're going to be on the property praying and praising. We're going to start worship at 10 o'clock. You can arrive by 9:30 if you want to, anytime between 9:30 and 9:45. We're starting at 10 o'clock. So hopefully you can come and join us. If you can't join us, then we're going to be online at noon. Thank all of you who were able to celebrate our 15th anniversary of Pastor and People. And I pray to God you enjoyed our worship. If you were able to check it out, you think it'll bless somebody else, then share it. Join us next week for week 3 of our Paradoxical Commandment discussions. We're going to focus on our 3rd commandment next week. If you are successful, listen, you will win false friends and true enemies. Succeed anyway. People are illogical, unreasonable, self-centered. Do good anyway. If you do good, people will accuse you of what? Selfish, ulterior motives. Do good anyway. If you are successful, you're going to win some fake friends and some real enemies. Succeed anyway. If you want to hear more about that, then join us next Wednesday at noon or 6:30. God bless you. Looking forward to